Evening, everybody. This is DrHack, and I know exactly what you guys are thinking today because I saved this one for last. You guys are thinking, how in the world is this guy going to get us to play 23 moves of chess theory in the longest line of the Caro-Kann without teaching us how to memorize anything? I got you. Watch this. Now, I want you guys to imagine with me for a minute a farmer with an overeager hole punch. You know, a hole punch is one of those things that you put holes in paper with. Okay? And he loads up all of his cows and he takes them to market. And man, those things have holes in them all over the place, right? Because he's overeager. And he gets there and the guy with the clipboard that's unloading the cows goes, okay, holy cow, check, holy cow, check, holy cow, check, holy cow. This is what I'm hoping happens for you guys today. Because we are finishing this opening. You'll be able to play this with no surprises after today. This is going to be great. So now we need to think about not what happens when they take it. We've done that. Not what happens when they push past. We've done that. What happens when they defend this pawn? And we're going to try defending it with something that looks ridiculous first to illustrate a point. Okay? And that point is that if we were trying to catch up in time in this opening, which we're not necessarily trying to do, but if we were, this kind of move would make it very easy for us to do that, right? We could always take the pawn and pull that queen right into the middle of the board. And that means that when we develop our knight, we're going to be attacking that queen. And she's going to have to move again, and that will give us an extra turn to move another piece into the game before he brought his second piece in. So I think at that moment we would have caught up a little bit in time, and that's good for us, right? So I got to assume that white defending that pawn with a queen is just a bad idea, any way that they do it. It would work exactly the same. We could take it and pull him right into that square and then attack it with a knight. What if he did it with the bishop? And I think this one is the same idea, but it's a little bit harder to understand the why behind it. Maybe it's harder to understand. I don't know. That bishop's not guarded by anything, and that's really his number one attacker, remember, in most of these openings and most of these lines. That's no different here. This bishop is kind of the bad one. It runs into his own stuff, and it has less mobility. This one goes around his own stuff, and it runs into your stuff all over the board, right? Even when this pawn gets moved up, it'll have all these targets. So that's his good one. So strategically, he probably shouldn't let you take that bishop off the board. So defending it with a knight or with a queen, not ideal for him, because we will, in a second, hopefully I've attuned you to that. In a second, we would grab that bishop and say, mine, right? Okay. So he probably shouldn't defend it with the bishop as well, because that's going to lose time for him. So that leaves the best move for him, which is to bring the knight in and defend it that way. And that's different now. Because when we take it, we can't just, we could just, but we can't just bring a knight in and hope it's going to win some time, because he could always just trade knights. And that doesn't lose any time for him. So what do we do then, right? Well, this is the moment where we turn on our DrHack strategy guide, and then we figure out exactly how you play this game going forward. Let's take all the pieces off the board. So before I do this, I have to apologize for being so long-winded. I know in advance what this is going to be, okay? It's necessary. This is one of the 12 major pawn structures of chess. And you didn't know it, but we've been working through them one at a time on this channel. Whoa. And since it's one of the major ones, that means it's going to come up again and again in other situations, and we need to know what it is and how to do it. Right. And it maybe what I'll do is, in editing, I'll add some special sound effects for the pawn moves, just to keep things interesting. Okay. So what we're looking at is something that's called the Caro pawn structure. If this pawn were moved over to, it would be called a Slav pawn structure. They're very much related. They're kind of sister pawn structures. So some people group them together if you're trying to look this up on the internet, for example. And they would call it a Caro-Slav pawn structure. That's why they do that, because they're so similar. It's just one pawn moved over here or over here. And when you think about what this is that we're looking at, we are looking at an area where if we were to move our pieces for black into safe places, which is usually behind the pawns, right? Because when you have the pawns out far, you've got lots of safe squares behind those pawns to hide pieces, like a bishop could hide here. It would be tricky to harass that piece, with pawns and things. But if you have a piece, let's say, outside your pawn structure, let's say you had a knight sitting here, that would be very easy to harass that piece with another pawn. And so when you think about maneuvering pieces, this is the safe area of the board that we have to maneuver through. And that's what I call our yard or our garden. And this is the fence around our garden. Okay? And so when you think about this particular pawn structure, our garden is very small. Very, very small. And the way that we have to handle it is either we have to remove some of the flowers from the garden to make less of them so that they can, be healthy, or you have to make the garden bigger. You don't have too many choices here, guys. So we're either going to trade off some minor pieces to make it easier to maneuver back here, or we're going to make it bigger. And when you think about those two moves, the one that happens the most often, or is the most likely that you can make happen, we'll put it that way, is actually the c-pawn. Because if you think about white's natural piece development, a knight goes here and it's attacking that one, right? A bishop, sure, it could be there. There could definitely be a rook stepping over here and hitting this square, right? Or a queen maybe. It's going to be very, very difficult for black to push this pawn up with any level of consistency, depending on what his opponent's doing. However, this one, I think we have more pieces that can aim at c5 than our opponent does. Because if you think about the natural development of this knight, it's almost always going to end up here, and that's 1. And if you think about this bishop, it's already aimed at it. That's 2, right? You could put it here or here. When the queen develops, she's either going to develop to c7 or e7 probably. And both of those things hit the c5 square. All right, now let's take a look at this from our opponent's point of view for a minute. There is one thing that stands out to me in this pawn structure more so than the other ones that we've looked at. Now, I do want you to remember the strategy that we learned in the other ones, these attacks, the way that they come to h7 and g7, those still exist here, right? So we're not excluding strategy from previous videos, we're adding to it, okay? And what we need to know about this one is, when you take 3 pawns on one side of the board and you kind of attack 4 pawns with it, taking the minority size of things, it doesn't generally work out that well. Because the guy with 4 pawns will, when they all trade evenly, he'll be the guy with 1 pawn left. He'll be the guy with an advantage at the end of the day. So pushing these white pawns forward doesn't give white an advantage in pawn structure. That's important because they're going to do that a lot. Okay? What it does is, if they put a pawn, let's say, on h5 or h4, it creates a pawn that is attackable in the end game. And in the end game, it will not by itself be able to get an advantage, make a passed pawn, and beat you. So we are very interested when they start pushing these pawns that later in the game that's good for us. Okay. Now, if they were to start doing that on this side of the board, if they were to start doing that on this side of the board, that's a different story because now we've got 4 pawns over here against 3 pawns. And at the end of the day, when that smoke clears after that battle clashes, right, they may have passed pawn and they may win the game there. So if white is going to play some kind of end game thing with this pawn structure, it's going to be on the queen side. But when we get into moving the pieces around, you're going to find that they really love moving these pawns on this side of the board. And that's when you go, right? Perhaps white's strategy is going to backfire on him. That's what we're going to hope to do in this one. That's how we're going to get ahead. Let's see it in action. All right, so let's explore a few moves. And now let's show you, how much strategy of this you really understand, because it's significant at this point. Okay, so we're going to have him defend the pawn. He's not going to take it. He's not going to push past. And we get to decide what to do with our bishop again. Right, he's the one who gets the big attention because he's the bad one. So we can notice that we can't put him here and we can't put him here. We need to make a square for him. right? So by capturing this, what we're saying is my bishop needed a square, and here's my square. And that way we can put him outside of our structure before we kind of cramp it up in there. And that also is, handling some of these attacks that come at h7. That's great. We love that, right? Okay. Now white has a couple of ways that he can try to defend this knight. Right? What if he tried like this? This is the moment where the computer engine is going to be sitting on your left shoulder and it's going to be like, take the pawn, right? And DrHack's going to be on your right shoulder and he's going, don't do it, don't do it. The computer likes taking the pawn. And when you take the pawn, I can't tell you why it likes that. Because you got a pawn, okay, but he's going to get 3 turns for that pawn. So technically, as amateurs, I mean, if we were all grandmasters, sure, right? As amateurs, we're going to get attacked now. There's no chance to not get attacked here. Okay, our queen's going to lose time whenever the knight or the bishop comes into the game. This one's even better because now the queen can't even go here and pin the knight, right? And so we're starting to lose time with the queen. He's going to get 2 or 3 or 4 pieces into the game against your queen. He's going to attack you guys. I cringe a little bit inside, taking that pawn. So I don't do it. What I do is the principled move. We know that our pawn structure has a small yard, and we don't want all of our pieces crashing into each other back there in that yard. So trading off a minor piece or 2, very acceptable and even a good idea. So if we were to take this knight and then develop another piece into the game with time now, because that one's not defended, right? You'll have to do something about that. I think this is the most principled way to take this on. And we see that our strategy with the pawns, pushing these 2, is still very intact because all of the pieces that do that work are still on the board, right? They're still on the board. This is where we're looking. Okay. So then if he's not going to defend the knight, maybe he's going to move it. Well, maybe we should try this one, right? There's a pawn here. What do we do? Well, remember our strategy later. We want to play c5. Wouldn't it make sense to push the b pawn because that helps this square and later we can push c5 easier now? That's exactly what it is, right? This is great now. And our strategy got a little bit further off the ground. We're actually ahead in time now because we have 1 piece in the game, so does he. We could have brought another piece in the game, guys. I just didn't there. And so I think this move was really principled. It was aiming towards our strategy to play c5 later. Perfect, right? We know what to do. We're doing it. And then that leaves just the knight move maybe back, let's say this way. Because if he goes anywhere else, he doesn't gain time. And our next move can be a new piece into the game or getting ready to bring a new piece into the game. And we should get ahead of him now as black. Right? So what if he tries this and gains a little bit of time? Okay. I don't know if I need to say this or not. Probably not, right? The bishop shouldn't go back behind the pawns. He should stay out if he can. And we've seen this before with the bishop trying to get trapped by the pawns over here. Well, something we know about this pawn structure is anytime they move these pawns on this side of the board, we kind of scratch our chins and we go, that's good for us later. It's not necessarily good for us now. We need to find a home for our bishop, but it's good for us later because those pawns will be attackable and they can't by themselves make a passed pawn. Right? Well, okay then. And if he offers a trade of bishops, are we going to accept it? Heck yeah, right? That's the time where we go, let's get those off the board. That's the biggest thing coming in attacking us. Let's get that. Okay. So we've got ourselves into a position where we understand the big strategies. We understand about c5. We understand the end game with the pawns, right? This is not necessarily good for white, although they do it a lot. Okay. And we can play this game. This is ours now. And as you learn more and more about this, the deeper you go into it, the more beautiful it even becomes. So I encourage you to go further with this. There's no big surprises in this one, guys. You guys enjoy. Have a good one. Crush some people with this. See you in the next one. Take care. Bye now.